$7.53 billion people, the current population of our Earth. Our world is inevitably running out of resources, and someday we will stop growing. The question remains, when will our world overflow?
So, as Xavier just said, the question we were posed was, what is the Earth's maximum population? So, to work this out, we have to know what affects a population, or in other words, what are the needs of a population. So we started off looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that splits it into 5 different categories. The first one on the left there, physiological needs, is what we really focused on because that's what makes us alive. So from there we went and looked at the 6 factors inside that need. 3 of them were tangible, 3 of them were intangible. The intangible ones we couldn't really model because they're not physical, so we just really looked at water, food, and shelter. And then down the bottom there, you can see the resources which directly feed into them are water and land. Water feeds obviously into water and also into food, and land feeds into food and into shelter. Once we got our heads around this, we could start actually doing the modeling. So the first 2 models, both models were very similar, but the first model asked for current conditions, whereas the second model was future or perceived conditions. So to define what current conditions were, first we looked at the removal of waste, but we decided that probably wasn't really realistic for a projection on what future the population could become. So we moved on to more looking at unused resources. That leads itself directly to trends, but we decided not to use trends because if you look at the trend of resource use, it's gradually getting more and more, and eventually you would just start using more of the resource than you've actually got. So in the end, we looked at the ratios of used to unused and extrapolating on them. And then the second model was basically the same, still using the ratios, but instead of using the current proportions and just expanding them, we redid the whole proportions to make it optimized.
Okay, so as James mentioned, for the first model, we would define the current available land and water resources in the world and how much of each was used for food, water, and shelter, the 3 factors. And now we split the world into 13 major regions because of varying consumption rates and productivity rates. So here we have the 13 regions. And firstly, the total available resources were found per region. And water was first analysed as the main resource, and it was divided into municipal water, agricultural water, and industrial water. Municipal water is defined as the water used by households for drinking and daily use. And agricultural water is used for crop irrigation and watering livestock. And industrial water is used in industry and is not considered as it does not limit any of the requirements for life. Now, total usable land was split between agricultural land, which was further split into cropland and grazing land, and also urban land. We found a percentage of total water or land used in each category based on current proportions. So the total water and land in each category could be calculated by multiplying the percentage by each resource. And here we have the resources per region. And population, which was influenced by the factor of water, could be found using the total municipal water available multiplied by current consumption rates for municipal water. So now we've covered water, the municipal water rather, and so food production takes into account both land and water, so I'll be covering the water aspect of food production. So food production was affected by the amount of agricultural water available. We knew how much agricultural water there was and how much water was required to irrigate land sufficiently. So we were able to calculate the amount of land that can sustain food growth. This figure was compared to the actual amount of agricultural land available, and whichever was smaller, land or water, was the limiting factor. And now Xavier will explain the land component of food production.
Now, food production per area of land was researched, and a value for each region was found for how many tons of food produced per million hectares. We knew the amount of land there was, so total food production could be found. Next, we considered imports and exports. Every country exports a percentage of their produce, and the sum of all exports give total world exports. Every country imports a percentage of total world exports. The resulting food in a region is the food produced minus exports plus imports. Using resulting food and consumption rates per person, a maximum sustainable population could be calculated from both grazing and crops. Assuming people need a diet consisting of both, whichever food category had the smallest population was considered the maximum possible population based around food. The final factor to be considered was shelter, which relies solely on land. We took the available urban land, and using the population density of urban areas in each region, we found the maximum urban population that could be sustained. Likewise, we assumed that there would be people living outside of urban areas, in agricultural areas, and we called this the rural population. We multiplied the total agricultural land by rural population density to find the maximum population in rural areas. This came from the assumption that people lived on farm areas as they required manpower. Adding rural and urban populations together, we found a limiting value for population in each region based upon shelter. Finally, for each region, the smallest population out of the three factors, food, water, and shelter, was the limiting population, and this was the highest sustainable population for that region. Adding all of these populations together, the maximum carrying capacity of the Earth was found to be 9.9 billion people.
Hey, I'm Ethan, and I'll mainly be talking about the second model. And so, as James already said earlier, we interpreted the second question as basically asking, how can we maximize the carrying capacity utilizing all of our possible land and water effectively so that none are in excess? Essentially, we kept the entire world as the same condition as it currently is, but simply repurposed the habitable land and usable water to ideal ratios for each region. For this reason, the model was fundamentally based off the first model, having the same factors considered in it, with the one major difference being the change in the ratios. For simplicity's sake and for no particular reason, let's take India as an example. In the first model, with India's available 223 million hectares of land and 578 cubic kilometres of water, these are the ratios to where they are split. Using these same ratios for the currently unused land and water, India could sustain these populations solely based on each factor. However, this is obviously not the most efficient way to distribute their water and land, as the population due to crops is significantly greater than grazing, yet they both require the exact same resources. So here's the challenge that India faces. They currently use heaps of water on crops and not as much for grazing or municipal, resulting in a far greater population due to crops. What our second model aimed to do was redistribute this excess water usage to equate the possible populations. Thus, if we take some water from the crops and repurpose it for municipal and grazing use, it results in a much higher possible population overall. A similar change is done for land as well, which interestingly results in land now being the limiting resource. This was achieved using 4 equations for both resources as shown. We want the 3 populations to be equal within each resource, resulting in a 4-way simultaneous equation where the population and ratios are the unknowns. When these are solved, these are the new optimized ratios, and these are the new possible populations resulting from these ratios. As you can see, the final populations are equal except for the municipal, as this is based only on water, whereas the others are land limited. This process is done for every region, giving a total possible population of 24 billion based on a minimal diet.
Currently, we have a capacity of 9.9 billion people, the way we are going. In the future, we could reach 24 billion if we plan, think, and collaborate before we grow. Otherwise, our Earth may not sustain this life. Thank you to the IMMC for allowing us this opportunity to compete and also to come to Hong Kong. Thank you.